Hello, thank you, and welcome to today's session on insights into last year's exam, the May-June 2024. So it'll be the last one on the 2016 specification. My name is Carol Hughes. Some of you may have attended trainings with me before because I predominantly do the German trainings, and I've been working for Pearson for about 8 years in this role. Can I just advise you, I've put it there in the chat box as well. If you do have a mark scheme to hand for the writing, you will find that particularly useful. I have put mark schemes there for almost all the questions which will appear on screen, but they will change from one mark scheme to the other. So if you do have your own mark scheme to hand, that will be useful for you today. So I'm just going to go over the goals for today's session, and then we'll bring up a poll. So what we want to do is we want to familiarize you with the feedback of the exam from the examiner's report, and we'll be looking at the feedback of the May-June exam series with specific detail at the candidate scripts on paper 4, but also the speaking. We're going to consider results against the mark schemes, and there will be opportunity to practice marking some further candidates' work scripts, the productive tasks. And obviously, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. So, first of all, could I just ask you, Jira, to bring up the poll for us, please? We just have a quick poll just to see how is your experience of this year's examination. Obviously, there's been lots of changes since 2016 was first introduced. So I think we only got 7 of you on at the moment. And that's nice to see that the majority is positive and no negative experience. So I shall end the poll and just share the results with you. So we can have neutral and positive, which is a very good call. So I hope you feel as positive as we also go forward to 2024. So I'll take that away. And to start with, this is the agenda of what we're going to do today. We're going to start with the feedback on the receptive skills and the key points made by examiners. They're going to move on to the productive skills, looking at a speaking example. We'll pull on some of the feedback, first of all, from the examiners, and then actually mark a picture-based task and a conversation, and then move on to considering some writing skills and looking at how students could have improved their answers. So starting with our listening and reading skills. Now, the advice here, although it says foundation, does actually apply to both foundation and higher. And I'm sure most of you will have had a look through at the examiner's reports. And it's interesting that some of the same things come up again and again. And I'm just going to turn off my camera so that you can concentrate more on the actual screens. So using the reading time to think carefully about requirements of questions, and particularly thinking about question words, that's come up I think almost each year since the exam has been run. So it's something that obviously question words are really important. Now, the focusing on grammar and the gender in gap fill questions during the reading time, and that can also support candidates. Just remember reminding students that the title often provides an important clue for what they're listening about. The titles now being in English. And to check the number of works available, because if there are 2 marks, then 2 pieces of information will be required. Now, obviously, the listening papers are based on the vocabulary in the vocabulary list, and it's important that students are familiar with that full range of vocabulary in the vocabulary contained in the foundation level vocabulary list for foundation level. and also obviously in the higher for the higher level. Now, this was one point that the examiners made. Using that time carefully, focusing on both genders and meaning may aid candidates, is what they said. And I just pulled out this question from the paper as a good example, because this is the type of question where the answers can almost be gleaned, first of all, just in the reading time, because students can work out, oh, from the meaning and from the grammar, that there are two possible answers. So if we take our first one, Leonie hat im, well, it's only going to be Stadtzentrum and Dorf are the two possible answers. So really working with students to make sure that they do that task and think about that task in the reading time sets them up then for when they actually hear it. And it's an activity which could fall well as a starter activity for any lesson, for any topic that you're doing. And you could either present it as it is in the exam, or you could even present just the words to start with that are in the box. And students have to pair those words up, so they could look for pairs such as Tante and Oma, and Bibliothek and Apotheker, and Freizeitzentrum. Sometimes there are three, and get them to discuss, well, what's the difference between Bibliothek, Apotheker, and Freizeitzentrum? They're all places. And then working with them, for example, that we have two feminine and a neuter here. Or on the other hand, you could just present sentences and then students actually work to think, well, what could fit in those gaps? So it was just an idea that we could take from the examiner's report and think about using it in the classroom. Now, the general advice of higher, and as I say, the foundation also counts for the higher, but it's to make sure that students are aware that it is all the topics and subtopics that are going to be tested. It's only in the role play that one of the topics doesn't come up. And something again which has come up time and time is the little words, particularly the negatives, the kein and the nicht, and how the qualifying adjectives can actually help students to really focus in on those little words. It's important for candidates to practice listening for gist too, because sometimes they may be asked to identify attitudes and opinions and draw simple conclusions. And going for whole sentences rather than just individual words certainly supports that. Synonyms are also important. And again, that's another really good starter activity for the classroom, just working with synonyms. And checking marks, the number of marks are for each question so that their answers are precise enough. There were, again, a couple of questions which this particularly focused on. One particular question, where there was obviously an issue, was the overlap question, which was question Foundation 11, Higher 14 on the environment. Lots of candidates focused on the word plastique, which was one of the answers in the multiple choice question, not the correct answer, but because the correct answer was picking up rubbish. It came from the sentence, nächstes Wochenende werde ich aber die viele Plastiktüten am Fluss aufsammeln. So lots of students just picked up, plastique, that must be the answer. And another issue, ensuring the answers are sufficiently detailed without losing clarity, but the necessary information is given, was another example in the foundation tier, where students hear the phrase, das beginnt Ende März, and they needed to write the end of March, not just March, in order to gain the full marks. With the reading foundation, we have here the characteristics the performance of better candidates was characterized by. And you can see there is some overlap between what is in the listening and the reading, because again, we have that recognition of key question words, knowledge of vocabulary, and Synonyms, because processing of information and recognition of different ways of saying the same thing. The common adverbs relating in relation, particularly in relation to time and intensity, so our little words, and the good knowledge of adjectives used to express opinions, as well as time, including that old favourite, the halb rule in German. There's nearly always a halb neun or halb acht somewhere along. So it's just things that we can revisit with students. And for higher, in addition to what we've already mentioned, okay, we we have some additional question words there. And detail in answers and attention to detail in the translation again, particularly in relation to the adverbs. Now, one question where the detail again comes was giving the precision in the answer was in the higher reading, question 3, when Nadia states, Ich bin gegen Fliegen, denn es verschmutzt die Luft. Many students might have written pollution and thought that was sufficient. But pollution alone wasn't sufficient. It could have too many connotations. It needed to include the word air for air pollution. So that's our brief overview, and I'm not obviously going to look at any question papers now. I've just given you some examples there from the reading and listening papers. Does anybody have any questions that they want to jot in the chat before we move on to the speaking? Right, so I can't see anybody typing or anybody giving any questions. So let's move on to speaking, paper 2. And there was some do's and don'ts. And again, some of these have come up each year, the do's and don'ts. The role play, keep it short. So I know from delivering conducting the speaking training that it's something we always reiterate every year, that the answers in the role play should be short and concise. Extending answers with unnecessary waffle can often lead to candidates losing marks, as the response then becomes unclear. Asking questions is also a key element of the role play. With Edexcel, students don't need to ask questions in the conversation, but they do need to make sure they can ask these questions in the role play. And it's something, obviously, as teachers, we need to regularly practice with our students. They do now have the prompt that you can give them, hast du eine Frage or haben Sie eine Frage, depending on the context. But that is really important. And the other important thing for the role play is to get students to listen carefully to the question, which is the third prompt of the role play marked with the question mark. So again, it's really key that students are aware of the symbols, what they have to do, and that they practice these asking questions. As regard the picture-based task, it's important that students give a full description of the photo. It's suggested that candidates should use at least 3 to 5 sentences. We can say 3 to 5 sentences, and obviously some sentences are going to be much longer than other sentences. One of the examiner points, which I particularly noticed, is that whilst opinions can be given about that picture, a candidate shouldn't deviate from, for example, a school picture to give opinions of their own school, but keep the focus on the picture. So, for example, focusing on how the students look or the fact that they don't wear uniform as a positive aspect rather than the fact that the student itself, what their uniform is. Now, whilst the role play responses were short and concise, here the candidates need to develop their answers. perhaps aiming for 3 sentences for each bullet point. And with that in mind, they can use their preparation time wisely. Tenses are also key for this task, with both the past and a future time reference required. Now, with German, there are many ways we can encourage candidates to refer to the future, including the present tense with a future adverb, as well as the true future tense, and various other suggestions as well. And all of these will be credited as reference to a future time frame. And it is important to note that the presentation in the conversation is optional. If candidates do choose to do a presentation, encourage them to be clear in their delivery and not to include everything they want to say on the topic, because that leaves you as the teacher with questions to ask, thinking, well, what are they able to then respond to, particularly at foundation level? The conversation should very much be a springboard to give them confidence to respond then to your questions. Overrunning on the 1 minute, particularly at foundation level, will often have a detrimental effect on a candidate's marks, as the whole conversation may overrun, or they may score poorly on spontaneity, as may also be the case in candidates who answer a list of prepared questions. And one last point there is try to encourage your candidates to take the initiative. So, having answered the question, to give an opinion and give extra information. Now, if you are looking for activities to practice speaking with candidate, can I remind you to have a look on the web page for the Spring Network 2018 event. Now, in this event, we shared a number of different activities to develop this skill, and you will find this still useful, and in fact useful also for the 2024 exam as you're rolling that out. So I've put the link for that here so that you can have a look at it. So we're going to do some marking now. We're not going to mark the role play because that's quite short, but we're going to hear a student completing a picture-based task. And what I would like you to do, I've got both mark schemes up here on screen. So if you can have a look, listen to what I'm going to play, and then mark the candidate accordingly using the 2 mark schemes, and just jot your 2 marks into the chat box. So it starts at 1 minute 20. So if you give me a moment to get to the right place. That's about it. Okay.
Wir beginnen mit Aufgabe 1. Rollenspiel Nummer
Oh,
HR1.
sorry, it's jumped to the
Sie
beginning.
sind in einem Hotel in Österreich. Sie sprechen mit der Person am Empfang. Was für
Abendessen.
heute gibt es Pizza oder Schnitzel?
Right, I think we've got the end of the role play here. I'll let it play from there.
Aufgabe 1, das Rollenspiel ist fertig. Jetzt beginnen wir Aufgabe 2, das Bild Nummer HP3. Beschreib mir das Foto.
Auf dem Foto gibt es 4 Leute in der Vorgrund. Ich denke, das sind auf dem Wald oder einem Park wandern. Die Leute sieht glücklich aus und ich denke, das sind ein äh, oh no, und die Mädchen hat ein Handy und die, die Jungen ist höre Musik.
Ich finde fit bleiben im Freien schrecklich. Und du?
Ich liebe fit bleiben, weil es ist sehr wichtig, um gesund zu bleiben. Auch, aber manchmal es ein bisschen schlecht ist.
Erzähl mir von deinem besten Sportevent im letzten Jahr.
Letztes Jahr bin ich zu den Olympics in Paris gegangen. Es war ein schönes Stadion und es hat sehr interessant anderes Wettbewerb auf den Olympics. Zum Beispiel gibt es Radfahren-Wettbewerb.
Welchen neuen Sport möchtest du in Zukunft lernen?
In die Zukunft möchte ich Basketball lernen, aber ich denke, dass bin ich ein bisschen klein bin. Und wenn und man sollte ein bisschen großes ist, weil es mehr einfacher ist.
Warum ist Sport wichtig?
Sport ist sehr wichtig, weil es ist eine gute Möglichkeit zu neue Leute trennen neue Leute. Und es ist wichtig zu bleiben gesund. Ja.
Noch etwas?
Auch gibt es viel anderes Sport. Deshalb alles kann ein anderes Sport haben. Machen.
Okay.
Okay, if you would like to jot your 2 marks that you think that performance was awarded in the chat box. If you're not sure of the actual mark, just the range of marks you think it comes into. Right, I'm not quite sure how many people we have. I think it was 7 we've got. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people have suggested marks, which really range for communication and content as 9 to 12 box. Lots of you in the 9, 10. And we've got a range of marks, 3 to 4 mainly, and a 5 in the linguistic knowledge and accuracy. Well, I'll move on
Wir
to
beginnen mit
oh,
Aufgabe
sorry,
1.
apologies. It's going to play it again. Right, so for communication and content, these were the positive things that the examiners have picked out. First of all, the candidate responds to the set questions with mostly fluent and developed responses. you might have noticed that the teacher only used noch etwas on the last bullet point. There is minimal hesitation and minimal prompting needed from the teacher. All 5 prompts are answered unambiguously, and the candidate is able to expand on each prompt. There is predominantly effective adaptation of language to describe, to narrate, and inform. So for the description, for example, the candidate uses expressions like im Wald and sieht glücklich aus. The candidate expresses opinions effectively and gives justification, which are mostly developed. For example, ich liebe fit bleiben, weil es ist sehr wichtig, gesund zu bleiben. Okay, the verb might be in the wrong place, but that doesn't matter at this point. The pronunciation and intonation are intelligible and predominantly accurate. So the candidate was actually awarded 11, and it was said to gain higher marks, they need to be consistently fluent and more consistently effective adaptation of language. Now, for linguistic knowledge and accuracy, a lot of you have gone with 3 to 4 or 5. And the points that the examiner makes are there are predominantly accurate grammatical structures with mostly successful references to different time frames. So, for example, the candidate says, letztes Jahr bin ich die Olympics in Paris gegangen, in die Zukunft, and she actually corrects the will ich to möchte ich basketball lernen. Right, she doesn't put lernen, but the will is want to, so it's not a proper future, although she has got there in der Zukunft, so it would have been okay. Responses are predominantly coherent. Errors occur, but rarely hinder the clarity of the communication. So, for example, die Jungen ist hören Musik, weil es eine gute Möglichkeit zu kennen neue Leute. We had some lack of clarity there. Consistently accurate structures with coherent responses would have gained higher marks from the band above. So she got 5 for her marks. So a lot of you did say 3 to 4. Some people did say 5. Anybody want to comment? Anybody surprised? Anybody think you were all thereabouts the 9 to 12, and she got 11? But lots of you said 3 to 4, and she actually got 5. Anybody comments from anybody? Obviously, it's something, it's embedded in the PowerPoint, so it's something that you can go back and listen to again. Jessica, you're asking how many references do you need per time frame? There is no number on it, Jessica. We don't say they need to make 3 references per time frame or anything like that. They just have to include references to time frames, past and future. So none of these things have numbers by them. You know, it's not how many connectives, oh, they've got to hit 5 connectives or 3 different connectives. No, there is nothing like that. So I hope that's useful. Okay, we're actually going to hear the same candidate, and we're now going to hear her doing her conversation. So if we do the same thing, I've got the mark schemes there on screen for you. So if we listen to the conversation and then you use the chat box to put in some marks. Right, again, bear with me because I need to get it to 5 minutes 20.
Wir beginnen mit Aufgabe 1, Rollenspiel Nummer HR1. Aufgabe 2, das Bild ist fertig. Jetzt beginnen wir Aufgabe 3, die Konversation. Zuerst sprechen wir über Thema 4. Also, hattest du einen Traumberuf, als du ein Kind warst?
Als ein Kind wollte ich ein Arzt werden, aber es ist sehr schwierig zu bekommen, einen Arzt.
Warum?
Weil man einen Abschluss haben muss und gibt es viel Arbeit, um einen Abschluss zu bekommen.
Und was ist dein Traumberuf jetzt?
Jetzt, mein Traumberuf ist ein Koch, weil ich viel Essen für meine Familie gern koche. Aber das ist sehr anders dann ein Arzt, weil ich weil ich bloß nicht gern.
Und welche Charaktereigenschaften braucht man, um die perfekte Köchin zu sein?
Man muss sehr schnell mit dem Kocher sein und es ist sehr wichtig zu lernen schnell neue Culture für die anderes Essen.
Interessant. Und hast du schon früher in einem Restaurant ein Arbeitspraktikum gemacht?
Ja, mein Arbeitspraktikum war letztes Jahr und ich bin zu einem kleinen Restaurant auf Bournemouth gegangen. Es war ein bisschen langweilig, weil es nicht zu Leute sind.
Wir beginnen mit Aufgabe 1. Rollenspiel Nummer HR.
Apologies. Apologies, we suddenly jumped to the beginning again. I'm not quite sure what number we were up to. I'll go up to there.
Arbeit, einen Abschluss zu bekommen.
Und was ist dein Traumberuf jetzt?
Jetzt, mein Traumberuf ist ein Koch, weil ich viel Essen für meine Familie gern koche. Aber das ist sehr anders dann ein Arzt, weil ich bloß nicht gern.
Und welche Charaktereigenschaften braucht man, um die perfekte Köchin zu sein?
Man muss sehr schnell mit dem Kocher sein und es ist sehr wichtig zu lernen schnell neue Culture für die anderes Essen.
Mhm, interessant. Und hast du schon früher in einem Restaurant ein Arbeitspraktikum gemacht?
Ja, meine Arbeitspraktikum war letztes Jahr und ich bin zu einem kleinen Restaurant auf Bournemouth gegangen. Es war ein bisschen langweilig, äh, weil es nicht zu Leute, ähm, nicht zu Leute sind.
Mhm.
Aber es war sehr cool, weil äh, es war ein guter ein guter Gelegenheit.
Mhm, schön. Und möchtest du in der Zukunft in England bleiben oder im Ausland arbeiten?
Ich möchte zu ein Ausland gehen, weil gibt es, weil es mehr Culture zu kennenlernen. Ähm, aber ich, ähm, aber es ist ein bisschen traurig zu nicht mit meiner Familie sein.
Mhm. Jetzt wechseln wir zu Thema 3, Schule. Gehst du gern in deine Schule?
Ja, ich gern meine Schule, weil weil ich habe viele Freunde und die Unterricht ist sehr interessant.
Würdest du lieber auf ein gemischtes Gymnasium gehen oder findest du die Mädchenschule in Ordnung?
Eine gute Frage. Äh, ich liebe ein alles Mädchen Schule, weil gibt es weil es gibt kein stressig mit Jungen und auch es ist ein mehr nett Gelegenheit auf Schule.
Schön. Und wie wäre deine ideale Schule?
Meine ideale Schule ist ein alles Mädchen und ein sehr modisch Schule, Schulgebäude, weil ich denke, dass Technologie sehr wichtig ist, besonders ähm, für die neue ähm, unter, unterrichtet. Ja.
Schön, interessant. Und hast du auch an einem Klassenfahrt teilgenommen?
Ja, letztes Jahr habe ich ein Schulaustausch gegangen. Das war in Königstein. Ähm, es war ein fantastisch Gelegenheit, äh, weil ich sehr, weil ich neue Gegend haben sehen. Und ähm, es ist Spaß zu ein Urlaub mit meiner Freundin gehen.
End of assessment.
Okay, if I could ask you again to jot your marks that you would assess this candidate in the chat box. So we've got a 10, a 9 and an 8. a 9, an 8, and a 7, a 9, a 9, and a 7. I've got two 997s. Somebody going for 10 to 12, 7 to 9, 7 to 9, 7, 8, 6. Okay, none of you are too far away. Some of you are almost precisely in agreement with our examiner. So let's have a look at what the examiner had to say. Well, to start with, there is no speech from the candidate. That's obviously what the candidate has chosen to do. And the teacher starts asking questions straight away. As I said, the opening speech is optional. Candidates are not necessarily going to score better or worse by doing it or not doing it. The questions lead on naturally from what the candidate has said, and this gives the impression of a natural conversation rather than a regurgitation of pre learned answers from a set list of questions. The candidate communicates detailed information relevant to the topics and questions and usually provides extended sentences of speech. Meine Arbeitspraktikum war letztes Jahr und ich bin zu ein kleines Restaurant auf Bournemouth gegangen. She doesn't actually wait to be asked where she went. She immediately says, as well as doing the Arbeitspraktikum, where it was. Language is frequently used creatively to express and justify a variety of individual thoughts, ideas, and opinions. For example, als ein Kind wollte ich ein Arzt werden. And the candidate is able to regularly vary expressions for different purposes. Man muss sehr schnell sein. Ich möchte zu ein Ausland gehen. The pronunciation and intonation are intelligible and predominantly accurate. So the candidate has scored 9. Now, to gain higher marks, the examiner has said that she would need to be more precise with some of her expressions, such as words like culture, which sounded English twice, kocher, and I think when she meant Kirchen, and the correct use of gefahren or geflogen instead of using gegangen when talking about travelling abroad. Now, as regards interaction and spontaneity, here the candidate is able to respond to all questions quite spontaneously, which results in mostly natural interaction. The candidate is able to initiate and develop the conversation independently, expanding and giving justification in most answers, and often not just one while, but she will add 2 reasons why. The ability to sustain the communication throughout all of the conversation is evident, but there is not enough spontaneity and ease to be placed in the highest band. So she's got 8. And finally, for linguistic knowledge and accuracy, the candidate is able to manipulate a variety of grammatical structures with some variety of complex structures. For example, gibt es viel Arbeit, einen Abschluss zu bekommen? There are predominantly accurate grammatical structures with mostly successful references to different time frames. For example, aber es war sehr cool, es war eine gute Gelegenheit. Errors do occur, but they rarely hinder the clarity of the communication. So, es ist sehr schwierig zu bekommen ein Arzt. That's one of the frequent false friends, isn't it? That students fall into the way of using bekommen for werden. Aber es ist ein bisschen traurig zu nicht mit meiner Familie. She's obviously missed a verb out there. So what would she have to do in order to gain higher marks? She's got 8, but to gain higher marks from the highest band, the candidate needs to produce consistently accurate grammatical structures throughout the conversation. Now, both these examples are from a candidate who overall was awarded grade 7. Of course, that is taking all of the papers that she's done, the writing, the speaking, the listening, and the reading. Right, again, are there any comments? I think 2 of you got 997 and she actually got 998. I think you were the closest, um, to what the candidates actually got. Not few people thought she should get 10 for communication and content, be in that top box, but she didn't quite make that according to the examiner. Any comments from anybody about our candidate? Okay, then I hope that has been of use, actually picking out things. All right, how often should the teacher interrupt for spontaneous questions? Um, Interrupt a monologue by all means, but if there is a conversation going on as there was no monologue, um, the candidate might say something and you might think, "Oh, that's an appropriate." For example, she said that she'd worked in a restaurant. Now, that you might have felt, "Oh, that's an appropriate point to say, oh, yes, when was that? Where was that?" But if you feel that the candidate is going on to immediately say when it was or where it was, that's not producing a monologue, that's developing the answer. So it's really only interrupting. We're not forcing spontaneity in there. We want a natural conversation. And a natural conversation isn't necessarily going to force spontaneity in. It's going to be really listening to the candidate, being aware of the candidate and when they're running out of things today to say, and when it's a good idea then to come up with the next question. And that's very similar to those knock etwas in the picture-based task, where it's often a question of knowing your candidates. And you might have a candidate in front of you who you think, actually, they have said everything they are able to say on describing this picture. It's not worth me asking knock etwas because anything else they're going to add is either going to be a repetition, and I've heard it where they've simply repeated the description of somebody who they'd not described before, or they're going to founder and think, well, what she want me to say? I don't know what to say. Um, and Jessica, you've asked if the candidate asks the teacher a question, does it improve their interaction and spontaneity mark? No, it doesn't necessarily improve it. It's one of the elements that is there in the spontaneity mark, the interaction and spontaneity mark. Um, and it's one of the things they can do, but again, we're not on that tick list. We're not saying they must ask a question. The questions have been dealt with in the role play. They can ask a question, and if they do, again, um, if you haven't done the exam before, just a very short answer. You know, if they say, "Was für Essen isst du am liebsten?" "Ah, ich esse gern deutsches Essen," and move on. Um, don't sort of hog the time, so to speak. So I hope those points helped. Okay, so in that case, let's move on to paper 4 writing. And we're going to look with each of the questions at one example from the examiner's report. We're going to look at what the examiner has said, and then a second example, which wasn't in the examiner's report, which again you're going to mark. Now, again, I have put the mark schemes there, the assessment grids there, but I will have to change from one grid to the other because they're annotated to show you the grids. So if you do have your own grid to hand, assessment grids, it will be of use to you. So let's start with some general advice. Again, the writing can be on any of the topic areas. It's all the topic areas in the specifications. Now, all this advice covers both tiers. So, being able to produce coherent sentences using a variety of verbs in the past, present, and future. Except for question one, candidates are going to have to use different tenses. So, it's important that they have those in their repertoire that they can use, even at foundation level. If it's a small number of verbs, being able to use a small number of verbs in the different tenses will be better than struggling to try and um, come up with the past tense of a verb in the exam, if they've got those in their repertoire to sort of regurgitate almost. One of the things that comes up is the continual use of es gibt or es gab and es ist and es war. So again, practicing using as wide a range of verbs to avoid those repetitions of es ist, es war, es gibt, es gab. I think that's particularly at higher level. We're looking for a lot more language than just those. And linked with that, obviously, encouraging students to learn as wide a range of vocabulary as possible, including adjectives, adverbs, adverbial phrases, because these can all add interest. These help the students own the work themselves. Now, with German word order is an issue. So, really make sure students are aware of the word order, including straightforward sentences, main verb in second position, inversion, verb and verb when necessary. Sorry, inversion of subject and verb when necessary, and the rules governing the complex verb forms. Also, the difference between the position of verbs when using coordinating and subordinating conjunctions. There is often, and again, that's taking those within the range of what's expected of the students. So, for foundation students, we are expecting them to be able to use the coordinating conjunctions and a few subordinating conjunctions. They might only know weil and obwohl. But for higher students, obviously looking at the grammar appendix, a lot more subordinating conjunctions are in the grammar appendix for our higher students. The other thing is being able to use a range of structures to give an opinion. So they don't, and this is one way getting away from perhaps just es ist, meiner Meinung nach, or ich finde das, as such examples. And then, of course, we go back to the previous point of making sure they know where to put the verb. And then, having given opinions, being able to justify them or explain advantages and disadvantages, particularly the latter at higher level. And ensuring that they know how to introduce more complex structures such as subordinate and infinitive clauses into their work. Now, again, this is advice from the examinators. It's from the 2016 paper, but a lot of it is advice we can take forward for the writing for the 2024 paper as well. So let's start by looking at foundation question one. Now, foundation question one, the first question, obviously, for it's enabling the least able students to get some marks there. So this was the one from the examiner's report. You may have looked at it. Just give you a few seconds to read it. If you haven't seen it in the examiner's report, or if you can't remember the mark, thinking about our mark scheme for the question, for the first question, we're looking simply for a description of the photo. We're looking for an opinion. It's only 20 to 30 words. How many marks do you think the examiner awarded that piece of writing. I haven't got the mark scheme up for this because it's a right. You can tell me you've all seen it, so you're not saying. Anybody like to say the mark, even if they have seen the examiner's report? Right, we've got an 11. Thank you, Sarah. So 11 is putting it in the top boxes, which are produces for the content, relevant information, occasional extra detail, uses language to give short descriptions, simple information and opinions with some success, uses small selection of common familiar vocabulary and expression with little repetition, and in linguistic knowledge produces simple sentences with some linking, accurate application of a small selection of straightforward grammatical structures, refers successfully to present events as appropriate to the task. Occasionally, errors occur that hinder clarity of communication. In actual fact, she got 12. The candidate here got 12. It is relevant, and there are extra details. So we've got auf dem Foto gibt es 5 Personen. Sie chatten und essen. That's sort of our extra details describing what they're doing, where they are. Sie sind in einem Restaurant. What they look like. Sie sind glücklich. And then we've got the opinion. So the sentences are short. They are simple, but they are successful. The opinion is successful. Nice opinion. Meiner Meinung nach ist volunteering extrem toll, weil es Leute helfen. Sie haben got a while. And there's no repetition of ideas. Und and weil have been both used for linking. There are correct pronouns. And it's mostly accurate, and certainly communication is not hindered. So our candidate there was awarded 12. So thinking about, okay, if we go for, because I haven't got the mark scheme up, if you haven't got a mark scheme there, we are looking for the marks for the next one. Do you think this scored, if that was 11, that was 12, what would this have scored? Our second example. Again, when you've decided, put a mark in the chat box. Okay, so we've got a suggestion of 5 to 6, 4 to 6. Anybody else like to have a go? Sorry. Okay, 5 out of 6 and 4 out of 6. Okay, 9 overall. Sorry, Jessica. I thought you were hedging your bets. Emma's suggesting they've got 10. So we've got a mark of 9, a mark of 10. So one more suggestion, and I'll bring up the mark scheme. I'll bring up the comments. And a 9. Well, in actual fact, it was slightly more. So slightly more marks than you are giving our candidate here. There is just, I'm sorry, I've just got something hiding my screen at the minute. Oh, I was trying to get rid of it, which I think no. Right, I've got to do it. Thank you. I can now see the screen better. So the candidate was actually given 11 out of 12. Why? Well, there is some description given. We've got the who, es gibt 5 Personen. We've got sie ist glücklich rather than sie sind glücklich. Okay. We've got an opinion. The meiner Meinung nach phrase here is not fully correct. In meinen Meinung nach volunteering ist echt gut und wunderbar. We've got where they are. Sie ist in der Küche. The sentences are short, but what's missing is there is no linking like our other candidate had. We've only got the link of und between our two adjectives. We haven't got any other linking. They've used that known phrase to introduce the description, auf dem Foto gibt es, which is a really useful one for candidates to work with. So overall, the message is communicated, the requirement of the task is fulfilled, but unlike our previous candidate, they haven't added any additional details. So had they added some additional details, we had the other one, ähm, Sie chatten und essen, and we also had the about the vial at the end there. So with additional details, this too could have scored a 12, and that would have improved it. So those are two examples of the foundation question. So unless there is any questions, obviously slightly more than some of you felt it would get. Let's move on to writing foundation question 2. Again, starting off with an example from the examiner's report. So I'll let you have a little read of that. Again, I'm going to ask you if you would actually, I don't think I've got the mark scheme on this one, but if you want to have a guess at marks, I'll just give you a chance to read it and then I'll go through it. Okay. So you may have seen this in the examiner's report. And in the examiner's report, it says that the candidate gives a clear starting time of the school day, expands the points by saying what they feel about it. Although the word order in sentence 2, gibt es 11 Stunden, is wrong, the main point is made, and they have developed it by giving again an opinion, und das ist sehr gut. Similarly, the response to the third bullet point starts well, because we've got mein Schuluniform ist unbequem. And I think ich and the next word really shows the importance about clarity of handwriting. It's obviously freue mich, but we sort of look at that immediately and aren't clear. Ist so langweilig der Tragen ist. So there, that second half of the sentence becomes slightly unclear. So we have two clear bullet points. The next bullet point is unclear. And the last bullet point is not made at all. So what they're saying there is no relevance to wo die Schulgruppe wohnen wird. So overall, the mark for communication and content has been capped at 6. And that's because the candidate makes basic points with some development, but because it borders on the 7 to 8 band more than the 3 to 4 band, it's put in that 5 to 6 band, and bordering more on the 7 to 8 means that 6 is then the mark awarded. Now, as regards the linguistic knowledge and accuracy, there are some accurate structures, such as für mich. There's the correct use of the present tense with beginnt. There are straightforward structures, and is some repetition of das ist. Linking, well, that's limited to using und. However, the wrong inversion of subject and verb in the second sentence and the lack of any future time frame, which the fourth bullet point requires, means the response is placed best in the 5 to 6 band, and this time going for the lower half of the band. So what could the candidate do? How could the candidate improve? Well, linking would be one way, and linking could be achieved simply by using und or aber. And more successful responses often contain a verb with a while clause. So if this was a candidate, I think saying to them, on your next piece of work, I want to see some linking using und, aber, and weil would be a way forward. So we now have a second example, and this time I'm just going to close my group chat and I'll open it again in a minute. You have got the same question, you've got a response, and if I can ask you to use the group chat again, and I'll move on to show you the second mark scheme. We've obviously got the first mark scheme, the first mark grid here, and then the second mark grid we can bring up. Okay, I'll move on to the linguistic knowledge and accuracy. Okay, when you've decided which 2 marks you would award this candidate, again, could you write it in the linguistic knowledge and accuracy? Sorry, in the group chat. So we've got some 6, 4, 6, 5, 4, 4, 6, 4, 6, 5. So you're all sort of in the middle there. 4, 4. Okay. So let me show you what and why. Right, as regards communication and content, there is some relevant information. Once again, bullet point 4 is not addressed satisfactorily. We know when the school day begins. We know that there are 5 lessons per day and what the uniform consists of. But that fourth bullet point, it's not one that we can understand what the candidate is saying. There is a little development. There's development at the second bullet point because we have a list of subjects. And the third bullet point with a list of items of clothing for girls and boys. So the language used is done with some success, particularly in response to that first and third bullet point. But expression is constrained. For example, act or ich Stunden 5 pro Tag. The missing out a verb there and getting the word order wrong. Now, the candidate uses a small range of familiar vocabulary, selected independently. They haven't just relied on those bullet points, but this consists mostly of nouns. So overall, the best fit is the 5 to 6 band and at the lower end of this band because of the lack of successful development. So we had some of you had gone a little bit lower, some of you to the 6. Um, but Sarah, you had a 5. Somebody else might have had a 5. That's the only one I've got in front of me now. So what about linguistic knowledge and accuracy? Well, like we have a restricted vocabulary, the student uses a restricted range of straightforward grammatical structures. There are actually only 2 correctly conjugated verbs, and that's beginnt and ist. As you can see, begin does come in bullet point 1. So the student can produce simple sentences. Again, there is no linking of clauses with conjunctions such as und or aber. There is occasional structures in grammatical structures, occasional accuracy in grammatical structures. For example, für die Mädchen, but this is very limited. There is evidence of success with the present tense, but the future time phrase required in the 4th bullet point isn't successful. So the mark awarded is in the top of the 3 to 4 band, and they have been given 4. So using our group chat, if that was a piece of work submitted to you as a teacher as part of your teaching lessons, what would your advice of next steps to the student be? What would you be telling them to do? Revise the future tense with Ronan. Add a wider range of vocabulary. Remember, bullet point 4 involves the future tense, so practice this. Yeah, I don't think we need to be precise as with Ronan. It is practicing the future tense. So that might be something that you need to incorporate in your next lessons. The other thing, obviously, as in the previous candidate, is linking sentences with connectives. And again, that could be an easy activity, starter activity to do, giving them 2 sentences or a number of sentences, and they've got to link them just using simple connectives. And you could come up with sentences that worked with und, with aber, with oder. So they've got those in their repertoire to use. Thank you. Okay, so let's look at the next question. So again, we're going to start by looking at one in the examiner's report. And this is the question 3, question 1 overlap. I'll give you just a chance to read it through. We won't mark this one because it is from the examiner's report. So what This is an example where a candidate can pick up marks for communication, even if the language is not always successful. And a reminder that I often do is the 2 marks are awarded independently of each other. Naught for communication is only awarded if nothing is relevant to the question that has been set. But once even a small number have been marks have been awarded for communication and content, that opens up the linguistic knowledge and accuracy marks right up through the mark scheme. So all the mark grid is opened up, although obviously it's unlikely that a candidate would get a very low mark in communication and content and a very high mark in linguistic knowledge and accuracy. But here, if we take each bullet point 1, the candidate gives their birthday. The reader knows that the birthday is next week in May, and although the surrounding language is not completely clear, the candidate explains what they would like for their birthday, so it's partially successful, rather than the more general idea of what sort of presents they like. But it's a partially relevant response, and they've given a successful personal opinion. The third paragraph is not wholly successful due to the wrong use of the verb wohnen and the muddled syntax, but we can understand that the candidate likes celebrations and dancing. And because the time indicator is included in the final paragraph, there is partial communication. The use of the past participles, however, confuses the overall meaning. So the mark for communication and content is at the top of the 4 to 6 band. Now, as regards linguistic knowledge and accuracy, some straightforward structures are generally successful, and there are some verb forms correct, so ist, möchte, finde. There is even linking with attempt at a while clause and with und. But there is only variable success when referring to that past and future events. And the final 2 paragraphs with the muddled verb forms and are on syntax with var gibbed at the end of a sentence, and where are errors which actually prevent the meaning being conveyed. So in this case, the candidate has only scored 2 for linguistic knowledge and accuracy. So we've been able to understand enough, or the examiners have understood enough to be able to give them that mark of 6 for content, but they've lost it on linguistic knowledge and accuracy. Now, this time, we've got another question which is from the overlap question, and it's the third example. Well, it's not the third example. It says third example, but I think it's only our second example actually. But if I like you to read that again, we've got part of the mark scheme here. So if you haven't got your mark scheme with you, you've also got the bullet points there for what the task was. And after a suitable time, I'll move on to the second part of the mark scheme. So again, if I give you about 5 minutes, possibly not quite that long. Okay, if I move to the second part of the mark scheme, and when you're ready, if you'd like to suggest your marks in our group chat. Okay, so we've got a range of marks between 7 and 10 for communication and content, but everybody is in that 5 to 6 grid for linguistic knowledge and accuracy. Oh, Jochen, you've dropped down to the 4. I think you're being a little bit harsh there. Okay, let's look at what was said by the uh, examiners. So, for communication and content, there is relevant coverage of points and development of opinions. The candidate communicates information about all 4 bullet points. And again, something to impress on your students is to make sure it's clear that they're addressing all 4 bullet points, perhaps by writing in paragraphs, leaving a line between each bullet points. They don't have to be covered in order, but making sure that it's quite clear to the examiner that all 4 are covered. Now, each of those bullet points has been expanded appropriately. For example, they are a waiter in a cafe near home. The job is a good reason. The job is good, and the reason is given for the job being good. And a downside is added. There are details of last week's spending given, and there is a clear future job plan with reason for this. So, language is adapted effectively. If you look at the sentence, mein Job ist sehr gut, weil ich neue Leute treffen kann. There are convincing personal opinions, for example, about the medical profession not necessarily being the dream job, but important for the candidate to have the importance for the candidate to have friendly colleagues. The language is mostly familiar, but there are a few good examples of uncommon language. For example, chaotisch, deshalb, Möglichkeit. But there are also some awkward corners. Auf die anderen Seite es chaotisch kann ist, which explains why this was awarded a mark in the middle, so in the 7 to 9 band, rather than at the top of the 10 to 12 band. Sorry, in the middle of the 10 to 12 band, rather than at the top of the 10 to 12 band. So it was awarded 11 overall. So I'm going to get the marks up there. Linguistic knowledge and accuracy. Well, again, this time it was awarded 7 marks. There is plenty of variation of grammatical structure. There's good use of adverbial phrases and intensifiers, and a variety of adjectives and verbs. Complex structures are used with ease, so they've used weil, they've used wenn, they've su. The sentences are frequently extended and well linked. And despite errors in the word order, the candidate offers a good example of a sentence with three consecutive clauses in Ich denke, dass du die Kaffee besuchen hast, obwohl jetzt ist es ein bisschen anders. And also linking with coordinate conjunctions, aber es ist nicht mein Traumberuf. The essay included successful references to past, present, and future events and indicates these with suitable adverbial, but more verbial constructions such as letzte Woche and in der Zukunft. Accuracy is varied, but more correct than incorrect. So the success of a good sentence, such as Wenn ich müde bin, ist die Arbeit stressig, has to be weighed up against the less successful attempts, such as Weil ich esse Kultur kennenlernen. So to reward the variety and accuracy, whilst taking into account the incidence of errors, which rarely hinder the clarity of communication, the essay has been awarded in the 7 to 8 band, but at the lower end of 7. So that's a crossover question. I think it was from a higher paper. Anything you would take away from that? Anything you would want to give the candidate if that was a piece of work in class as a task to do, or anything you would use to point out to other students of things that are particularly good? The examiner has mentioned quite a few good things. Basically, face to face, we would have a chat. Can we do anything in the group chat to have a quick comments? Yeah. So, Mary, you're saying that because he addresses each bullet point in turn, adds details, that's something that you would really sort of impress on the class that they need to do with this overlap question. And that's right. Was mochte instead of möchte picked out as a problem? Not by the examiner who looked at it. In der Zukunft möchte ich ein Koch sein. I think the examiner has picked out more the second part, the weil ich esse Kultur kennenlernen, rather than the möchte with the missing umlaut. But that's something obviously you could point out to students and say, um, you know, go back, check your work, make sure you've got umlauts on things like that. And one more. It does change the tense there. That's true. Yeah. And I'm looking, that is possibly the only future tense we've got there. But it's an interesting point you make there, Susanna. Okay. So shall we move on to our final writing question? Because I've also got the translation. Now, again, we've got what is in the examiner's report. And again, it's a school question. Ein normaler Schultag, die Vorteile von Clubs, gestern in der Schule gemacht hast, dein Schulleben nächstes Jahr anders sein wird, or wie das anders sein wird. So there are 4 bullet points. Now, I haven't actually been able to use a mark scheme for this because we couldn't get everything on the page. In fact, this examiner's example is on 2 pages. So I'll let you scan through the first part on this page and then I'll move it to the next screen. Okay, if I move it to the next screen. Okay, so what does our examiner say about this? This is the one that's in the report. So, as regards the communication and content, it's coherent, it's interesting and varied. There is mostly effective development of ideas, and all the bullet points are covered. The candidate expresses individual thoughts with a variety of vocabulary and expression, but there are some sections where language does not communicate clearly. So, and the response gains 11 towards the upper end of the 9 to 12 band. As regards the linguistic knowledge and accuracy, the examiner has said that there are some very good structures in evidence. There's a vowel in the first position in the sentence, there's a correct inversion following. The syntax is varied throughout the response, and it's predominantly fluent. The language is mostly accurate, and there's some examples of complex language and well-linked sentence, but there are also some errors. And that again means that a mark in the top band is not possible. Now, the sentence, for example, in die Erstenspause chatte ich mit meiner Freunde und das Clubs viele Vorteile hat, is a sentence that certainly we're not, we have to sort of read it a few times to try and work out what the candidate is trying to say. So, because of the errors such as that, the accuracy sits more comfortably in the middle of the 7 to 9 band and gains a mark of 8. Okay, so that was an example that was in the examiner's report. Now, I have a second example here. You will need your own mark scheme or a rough knowledge of the mark scheme if you haven't got one there with you. I obviously couldn't fit a mark scheme on without covering up some of the task here. Um, so if I let you read that, and if we could again go to the giving marks in the chat box for our final question, and then discussing what the examiners have said about it. So if I give you about 3-4 minutes to read it. Okay, any thoughts about the marks you would be awarding this? As I realise communication and content is obviously up to 16 this time, and our linguistic knowledge and accuracy up to 12 again. So we've got a 14 and an 8. Would tense affect communication and content mark as well? Um, if it's affecting, it could affect the communication and content mark, yes, as well. The formation of the tense is linguistic knowledge and accuracy, but the lack of correct tense is going to affect the communication of what they are trying to tell you. So although we say grammatical mistakes are linguistic knowledge and accuracy, um, and if you actually look at additional guidance, um, errors that hinder clarity, um, errors that hinder clarity are ones that will distract the reader from the content of the writing or that make it difficult to understand immediately. You have to reread it. Or, for example, inappropriate tense formation or mismatch of subject and the possessive adjective. That's in our mark scheme. Okay, we've only got one mark at the moment. I'm conscious we're coming up to sort of quarter two. Let's have one more mark in the chat box. Got a 13 and a 9. Thank you, Jochen. Okay. Well, in actual fact, I think you'd be surprised. This is the first time I think that you have been marking higher than our examiners. The every the communication and content falls in the 5 to 8 box. That's what it says in our 5 to 8 box. Variety of grammatical structures, some different examples of complex language, predominantly fluent, extended sentences, mostly well-linked, mostly accurate language and structures, mostly successful references to past and future. And if I tell you what the examiner has said, the candidate communicates detailed information relevant to the task, helpfully splitting the essay into 4 paragraphs. Each paragraph begins with a statement which addresses the bullet point and then expands on the point with further information. So in the opening paragraph, we are given a full explanation of how each school day is structured. This might suggest that the essay should be placed in the 9 to 12 band, but we need to consider the other aspects of the mark categories. Language is frequently, rather than mostly, effectively adapted. Sometimes the meaning is not immediately clear. For example, ein Vorteil von Clubs ist Schülerin besser am Sport kann. And sometimes it's obscured because of a wrong word. Die Pause drauf 15 Minuten lang. There are some individual thoughts. Meiner Meinung nach sind Clubs besonders toll in der Schule, but justifications for opinions are not always given as fully as they could be. The vocabulary is varied and relevant throughout, and there are some good examples of uncommon language, such as Mensa, ausgestattet und Spendenlauf. So overall, the best fit for communication and content is the top of the 5 to 8 band. Now, linguistic knowledge and accuracy, again, there is some variety of grammatical structure with good examples of varied syntax, including inversion, subordination. Sentences tend to be simple rather than complex, but there are some examples of prolonged, extended sentences, such as Am Mittagessen haben wir Essen in die Mensa, weil sie Mensa gut ausgestattet und das Essen ist lecker. In the third paragraph, there is evidence of coordination. Ich finde Mathe sehr schwierig und meine Lehrerin ist sehr streng. But this is an isolated example of a relatively straightforward structure. Complex structures are less frequent and not always wholly successful. For example, in the first paragraph, an incomplete while clauses and an attempted zu clause at the end. References to past and present events are generally successful, but the future is not successful in the final paragraph with the misuse of würde rather than werde. So, whilst language in the first 3 paragraphs tends to be accurate, the final paragraph reveals some more serious errors. Kann kennengelernt mit zu Fuß. However, it was awarded a mark in the middle of the 4 to 6 band for linguistic knowledge and accuracy, so 5. So I think that's interesting because in all the other examples, you've tended to undermark, but of course, this is our higher question too. It's the most demanding question. It's the one we're looking for the highest levels of language. And here, the marks you've given have tended to be higher than those given by the examiner. So to summarize, going through some of the things that the examiners say. So picking out from various reports that ensuring in question 1 that both tasks are met, and I'm going to show you an example of scaffolding if you haven't seen it before for weaker students. For question 2, making sure that a future time frame is included. And considering for weaker students using the language of the bullet point to frame the response. To develop the answer, encouraging students to address the bullet point and add an extra detail. And then following a basic fact, perhaps an opinion, is another way of achieving development. Avoiding that repetition of common verbs that we suggested before, but looking at linking to create more complex sentences. Thinking about adding those adverbial expressions of time, so even if the verb isn't completely correct, it's clear what time frame they're writing about. And some of those basic expressions that we teach students, es macht Spaß, and the past, es hat Spaß gemacht, making sure they're really familiar with those. At higher, I know you have to enter your candidates for the same tier for all the papers, but do think carefully at higher. Are your candidates up to the higher question 2? Again, we've got some ensuring all 4 bullet points are covered again. Thinking about sketching out an answer before starting to write, even if it's only bullet points that they're going to include. And again, I'm going to show you something that might help with that. At higher, students need to move away from the language of stimulus and to show as much original language. Students often want to include idioms there, but avoid those frequent or inappropriate use of idioms thrown in. They just sometimes don't work. And again, avoiding repetition of language. Adverbial phrases with inversion are often a good way to ensure linking. And then finally, ensuring candidates leave themselves time to check their work so they don't miss those umlauts that have been missed off on things like ich möchte. But the other thing is don't try to be overambitious. Higher students, know your linguistic skills when giving a personal account. Know what you can write about. Lying is not something that is a so, that we sort of discourage students from doing in the exam if they don't know how to express what they really want. Come up with another way of saying something else that's going to be appropriate for that question. These were two examples, and we've used these in trainings before for supporting students. So, for example, the first example was from a picture-based task on a sports picture. And working with that, you can get your students to write about any picture using that. The French example is here, but we could easily do it in German. Es gibt und es gibt. Um, it's a bit harder for Je n'aime pas. We don't have we've got Ich mag, of course, we could use, and Ich denke or meiner Meinung nach, so they get used to giving a reason. That's something that you could be using. And for higher writing, really for even for the overlap question, working with those bullet points so that students understand what the bullet point's saying, they recognize the tense they've got to use, and then they can have some prompts as to what language they could use and perhaps what complex structures they can use and how they could include another tense. So those were suggestions from previous trainings that I thought were worth including at this point. Excuse me. So let's move on to translation. We're just looking at the translation on the writing paper, the translation into the target language. And you have here a foundation tier translation. It's not from the examiner's report, it's another one. And again, if you'd like to sort of think, what marks would you give? You can use group chat by all means. I'm only going to give you a few minutes to look at it. We have the mark scheme there. Okay. So looking at it, sentence 1 gains 2 marks because the misspelling does not impede communication. They've put mine, they've got the wrong gender. That doesn't impede communication, that wrong gender. Sentence B does only score 1 mark because it says not I have one brother, but that little word only, and we talked about little words in listening and reading, is important. So that nur needs to be included to get the 2 marks. Sentence C, the elements are there and it communicates. Okay. Again, we might not have correct dative plural, but the communication is there. Element in sentence D, we have 1 element incorrect. My mother lived in a village in Germany and they've put Stadt. So again, we have got a missing element. So they've got 2 out of 3. And in sentence 5, that hasn't communicated because the only element which communicates anything which is in the English is the Fernsehen. So they have got 1 mark, but that's all. So overall, our candidate has 8 of the possible marks there. Now, with the higher translation, we're obviously talking about a passage. And this was the example in the examiner's report where you can see the meaning is partially communicated. The second sentence has wrong phrases and the third sentence has wrong words. In the fourth sentence, werden has been used when it should have been können, and language structures are only sometimes accurate, and the syntax is not always correct. So it has a mark of 5. So what about this translation? I notice we've only got about 5 minutes left, so as soon as you feel able, use our group chat box to suggest what mark that should be awarded. Okay, Mary, you're putting it in the 7 to 9 box. Eights. Okay, so let's have a look. It's actually got 7. So 8 was slightly ambitious for it. And the reasons why, if I, oh, sorry, I obviously haven't got the bullet points there. Sorry, I thought we had some bullet points. So the sentence 1 is accurate other than the dative masculine ending. Sentence 2 conveys the meaning, but there's a number of errors. For example, van for wenn and es ist regnet, and then the past tense used of bleiben because they've written blieben. And candidate hasn't known the common phrase of zu Hause, and zusammen Fernsehen isn't conjugated. Sentence 3, it looks accurate except for the tense, but they've missed out that element of mir because it does say my parents bought me a new table. We've got incorrect genders, but otherwise the meaning is conveyed. Sentence 4, we've got the adverbial time phrase, the gender is incorrect. And the final element of the sentence is not expressed accurately with the incorrect verb. So it has, in actual fact, gone into the 7 to 9 box, but most of you were in that box, but you went for the 8 rather than the 7. So, discussion and questions. I'm just going on because I'm realised time, but if you have any questions, please use the chat box to write them in there. So what we have looked at today is the examiner's report. We've used the mark questions from the examiner's support to then support marking some further examples. And considering the next steps for the 2025 exam, thinking about, we're not thinking now about the 2024 new specification, we're talking about the 2016 specification that will be for the last time held in 2025. Hopefully you can take some things away from our training today that you can then work with students to improve their writing or their speaking or their listening and reading for that 2025 exam. Can I remind you that the subject advisor support is out there and you have got this PDF sent to you, and it's in the resources, and the link was put in the group chat at the beginning. So hopefully you've been able to get that. It might be worth if you could put the link up again, Jira, in the group chat before we just finish. The subject advisors are experts and they're throughout the year to support you. And if you want to sign up to receive regular updates, you can do so by clicking on those links. If you want to find out more about further professional development courses that are going on, I know as regards German, we've got a spotlight on writing, which covers all languages. And we've got, if you haven't done the German in the past, the speaking test, there will be a conducting the speaking coming up too. So your feedback matters. It really does. I know that this is a different approach we've taken this year to the examiner's report, and you will receive an invitation to share your thoughts about the succession, and your feedback is invaluable. Although this is the last time students will sit, so it's the last time we'll run this on the 2016 specification, we would really like your feedback on whether you thought this approach to looking at the examiner's report in a training was helpful, so that we know what to do following the new exams when they first take place in 2026. So please don't hesitate to let us know what you need more of, what areas you think could be improved. And if I can wish you all the best for the rest of the evening and success for the rest of the school year. And I will pass you back to Jira for our to close our session.